So I'm doing a quick update today for you guys just to kind of go over the progress that I've made and uh, some of it I'm sitting on right here. I've got the seat mounted. I've done some axle stuff, suspension stuff, BMS progress. Just a lot of little things that are really starting to add up, and I'm really happy I did them. I was scared to hook up the BMS and just ruin that thing, but I actually got it right in the first try. All sorts of little stuff like that. So I'm just going to go over that one by one and show you what I'm up to. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here is the seat mount. So it actually turned out pretty cool, and it's probably more critical than you think. Um, the seat mount is a three-piece aluminum assembly with some dimple dies in it for extra strength. I got it from Sencut Sen. It's turned out really, really well. I'm really, really happy with it. I actually took the floor out of the mock-up and I brought it back into my office, mounted the seat on here. I have the heat going and everything, so it's pretty comfortable and I'm pretty happy with it. So the seat is angled now. Originally when I put it in, I was just going to mount it flat, but that's not a good idea for a number of reasons. It's kind of awkward ergonomically, and I have such a small cabin that I really need to get the ergonomics right. Um, Adding that angle pushes the driver's knees back and just gives it generally more space in the cabin. I had to adjust the roll bar as a result of angling the seat, but that wasn't really a huge deal. A little bit of the bodywork I had to change too, but in the end, it turned out really nice. I'm really happy with it. There's more room in the cabin now to stretch your legs, so that just worked out good. That was like probably the most straightforward, uh, best thing that I've done. Well, not best, but most satisfying thing that I've done since the last video. So the seat is mounted on rails, so it's adjustable back and forth. I thought that was important. Again, just to accommodate as many people in this thing as possible. This floor that I'm on now is sort of a mock-up. I was just kind of testing how strong this would be. Uh, I could add a couple more bends in this flat aluminum floor to really get it, stronger. But for the sake of carpet and all that kind of stuff, I think I'm just going to add some cross beams to reinforce the floor. That'll add some body stiffness too, or frame rigidity. So with the seat mounts, I'm going to put some tubes in there and then just figure out the rest of the floor from there. This is okay, but I want to get that stronger. So that's pretty much everything on the seat mount. Um, the bigger thing was starting to do the suspension, the front suspension. So the front suspension and the axle are kind of very closely related. So there has to be a fork or some kind of mechanism or piece there that avoids the axle, and getting that right was something of a challenge. So the first thing I should probably go over is the axle itself. So I ordered two C5 axles, one for the front, one for the back, and they just get mirrored. All my axles are the same length. We're not the front and rear axles, I should say. The pairs are the same length. There's no asymmetry there. So got the axles. Tried to cut it up with a hacksaw. That did not work at all. So I went and just bought an angle grinder, cut through the C5 axle. It's a solid axle, and then I had the A4 axle for a while. So I cut that up. That one was thankfully hollow, so that was a lot easier to cut through. And then I just made a 3D printed sleeve that kind of fits in there with pressure. And I hooked up the axle, and that is good. I mean, I also worked on the flexible coupling between the motor and the differential. Made a new differential mount. It's more adjustable. That's running smoother than ever. Still a little bit of tuning there, but I think I have it good enough for mock-up purposes. And then once I had the axle in, and I knew where it was going to be and where it was going to move when I steered, I could really start working on the actual push rod and the fork there, which took a lot of iteration to do. So it was really important to me to get the fork as manufacturable as possible. So I started out with a multi-piece design that was pretty simple. It worked okay. Ended up not having enough clearance. Just not an ideal design in a few ways. I ended up moving to a single piece fork, which is going to be more expensive, but it's not crazy expensive. Thankfully, the services to get CNC done stateside are now pretty good. So I figured that out. I just kind of figured out the right iteration of it. So I mocked up all the bushings there, so I have all the right stuff. I got the actual bushings on the way too, so I'll be able to put those in. But yeah, it has enough clearance and everything. I'm still working on the push rod belt crank geometry, so I want to make sure that I have the right clearance and travel for all that. Once I have that figured out, I can start going into the actual coilover mounting, so the hard point of the coilover on the body, or on the chassis rather. So that's not going to be very hard. I designed the push rods and the bell crank so that I can put those um, coilovers in a good spot where they're compressing against each other. So that's just a great load path for that. That'll be like a bar across the front of the chassis. So it'll add a little stiffness, but it's mostly just for mounting. So that should be pretty straightforward. The coilovers are expensive. I have to do a little more research on which ones I'm going to get in particular. I have a good idea already, but just kind of the right length really is what I need to fine tune. I'm going to get some double adjustable stuff. There's a lot of spring rate options, so that stuff is all kind of figured out. But yeah, I might try and 3D print some mock-ups before I do that. Maybe 3D scan something. Just have to figure that out. But yeah, that's all going pretty well. That's kind of been a big hurdle for a while, and I'm really happy that I'm starting to get it figured out. The other update is a pretty big one. So I got the BMS running. It works, as well as a translated Chinese BMS Bluetooth backend. Couldn't work. It's giving me all the data I want. Temperature sensors are great. Wiring was kind of a pain in the ass, and I'm gonna have to add little ring ends and all that and make sure that's all, secure. But really, I'm gonna do away with those million. I'm looking at it right now. It's right behind the camera. You need to do away with those million little leads. I'm gonna get some PCBs done that'll do the job of those leads, and just get some JSD connectors on those so I can get a much cleaner routing up to the BMS. Another note on the BMS is that I thought I would be able to top mount it in this tray on top of the battery. Ended up not fitting, which was kind of frustrating, but in the end, I just moved it up to the front of the pack, which is going to have its own kind of struggles. I wanted to have that kind of weatherproofed or in a good spot to be, out of the elements, but it just kind of didn't turn out that way, unfortunately. So that's going to have to be, sealed up somehow, but still allow airflow through it for cooling. I've designed all that stuff. I designed some cool bus bars that'll, rigidly mount everything. So that's going well. But again, just a little bit more to figure out there for mock-up purposes. It's just fine. But again, the data I'm getting out of it and the capabilities of the BMS I'm really happy with. All the sensing seems good. I got all the wiring right the first time, which is pretty amazing. Not patting myself on the back. I thought I was going to cook this thing. So yeah, that all just went really well. And again, all these little pieces might seem like small things, but all the little stuff was really, really important, and I'm really, really happy I got it done. Some of it I've been putting off for a while, but it's all kind of coming together now. There's some next stuff I'm going to work on, and let me just talk about that before I tie everything off here. So there's kind of a lot of possible ways to go when you're on a project like this, just because there's so much to do. I could start working on, the inverter I'm still waiting on for it to come back in stock. I'm told that it's going to come back in a few months. So when I get that, I can work on mounting that, work on the bus bars for that, and then get the heatsink mounted in the right spot and figure out how that's going to work with the liquid flowing through it. Is that going to be milled? How can I get that together? Stuff like that. I think I like to attack problems that don't necessarily seem so easy on the face of them. So I think BMS mounting, or not BMS, but inverter mounting and figuring out that heatsink are actually going to be pretty straightforward. Just more brackets, just more little pieces of metal. So I'm not super worried about that. It's just, it's hard to know where to go next. I know I'm going to have to reinforce the seat mount. I know I'm going to have to move to the back of the vehicle to the axle suspension like I did up front. But I want to stick to the front 2/3 of the vehicle because I have that mocked up. So I think next I'll probably do the steering column, get the mock-up steering wheel, get the positioning figured out, make sure the ergonomics are good. From there, probably work on the pedals a little bit more, make sure the positioning is all good, because you really don't want to be in a position where you just skip the ergonomics and then you find out when this thing is like on the ground that it's uncomfortable to drive. That would just be really bad news. So definitely steering column is on the way. And then from there, maybe some interior stuff, Again, this vehicle is going to have a complete interior. There's a lot of stuff to figure out there. Switch gear, wiring switches, all that kind of stuff, solenoids, fuses, all kinds of electrical stuff that just has to be done. Luckily, there's pretty widespread support for that kind of thing, but again, it's just one more thing to do. So yeah, definitely steering next, and then tie rods. So the tie rods, I got a good tip. The guy Tim, who all-wheel drives off his Mustang, if you haven't seen that, it's a really, really cool project. He knows just about everything about axles and tie rods and all that kind of stuff. That's what his project was all about. So I was like stuck on the tie rod problem forever. Like, because I can't just use rod end because the tie rods in the C5 have just tapered end. So they fit correctly. But he said, oh, just look up C5 bump steer kit. And of course, they had the exact straight rod ends I needed. So might be a little custom work there, but adapting the BRZ steering rack to the C5 knuckle is all of a sudden very possible because of that tip. So I really appreciate that from him. So I'll probably do that next as well. And from there, yeah, it's just, like a million little things. I think it's going to be tie rods, steering, in terms of column and wheel, more interior stuff, maybe start mocking up the dash, maybe start doing some upholstery stuff because that's very important, and I want to start trying that. They use lasered adhesive backed foam. That could help a lot, but it's going to be a lot about, what do I need to sew, what don't I need to sew, what kinds of adhesives to choose for getting the fabric on there, what kind of foams can I use the adhesive backed foam, is the backing 3D printed, is it a flat panel, all kinds of stuff like that. The structure behind the dash, what goes behind the dash, do solenoids go behind there, where do the fuses go, how are they accessed, all kinds of stuff like that, it's a ton of little things. So yeah, all that, just kind of working my way back, just as you get further back in this thing, you get more and more into the region of stuff that needs to be aluminum to really like get an idea of how it's going to work. Like engine mounting cradle, probably going to mock that up in plywood just to get it figured out in terms of like assembly, how the assembly goes. We'll probably mock up the roll bar with some cardboard and 3D print before I actually order it or find a person to make it. Because that's just going to work with the ergonomics and with the body and all kinds of stuff like that. That's a pretty tricky piece. But yeah, I'm just avoiding going into full aluminum for as long as I can, because then I'll have to order the whole chassis, and God forbid there's something wrong with it, then I can't really, it's just going to cost a ton of money to adjust at the prototype phase. It won't cost a ton of money later down the line if I can end up selling these things and I have a little bit of cash flow. But yeah, at this point, I just want to, keep my powder dry, spend as little money as possible or risk as little money as possible on this kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Again, if you have any questions or comments or anything in the chat or in the comments, a lot of you had a lot of good advice last time in the comments, which I really, really appreciated. In terms of communicating with the best guy I can, that's another thing I'm going to have to try out. I have a pretty good idea how to do that again. But again, it all plays back into each other. The interior, the electrical mounting, the fuses, everything is all intertwined. So yeah, I think next time I'll give you some updates on the steering and maybe a little bit into the interior. But these kind of things just sort of evolve naturally. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to be able to tell you next time, but it should be some exciting stuff. I hope you like this update. I know it was a little short, but again, a lot of little stuff that just had to get figured out that I'm pretty happy with how it ended up. So I'll see you guys next time. And again, I welcome all your comments and advice.